Welcome to this special edition of the AmeriCorps Connections podcast. I'm Nikki Fiacco, the host of the AmeriCorps Connections podcast. I'm excited to share a special partnership with 250 and Beyond, Our American Story, to share a series of short stories from AmeriCorps alums about what service looks like in their communities today. These voices help amplify the spirit of service and remind us that across this country, people continue to show up for one another each and every day. So what is 250 and Beyond? 250 and Beyond, Our American Story is a national initiative dedicated to making service to others visible and valued in all its forms. By reflecting on our nation's history and elevating stories today to inspire the future, we aim to realize a vision of a nation united through service. Led by a coalition of leading service organizations, 250 and Beyond is a call to action, honoring our past, celebrating our present, and inspiring the future, helping us respect our differences and transcend our divisions. For all of those national service and AmeriCorps members out there, let's keep getting things done. I hope you enjoyed this series. Take it away, Laura.
All right. I am Laura Swier Kotelman, and I served in AmeriCorps NCCC at the Perry Point, Maryland campus in 2001. It's been a little bit, but when I signed up for AmeriCorps, I was just out of college. I did not know what I was fully getting myself into or the paths that it would lead to. And it was a very incredible year that still shapes where I'm at today and the things that I'm doing today. That's why I'm excited to talk about this. I started team-based, Perry Point, worked in New Jersey at camps, helping like outdoor camps, and learned about black bears in New Jersey. Who knew they had black bears? Did not know that. Also did not know that bears like herbal essence shampoo. Why? Because they like broke into our showers and stole it. So interestingly, that was one part of my 2001 experience. Then I was in a group that had undergone training for the Red Cross, which became a huge part of my 2001. In 2001, there was Tropical Storm Allison. I was sent to Louisiana and Texas, worked there on doing community surveys, doing mold remediation, coordinating volunteers, ended up riding shotgun in an ambulance when a other volunteer had a healthcare emergency, ended up at a rural hospital in Louisiana. And you learn that what you're doing matters. And you're working with a group of people, and it's this incredible sense of accomplishment and seeing what happens when people come together and take on those needs, whether it's going through communities that were impacted by the tropical storm and flooding and working with a team and identifying neighborhoods that had been forgotten. I'll never forget walking into this house 2 weeks after the storm, and we walked in and I had to step out immediately because the smell of the mold, I couldn't breathe. And there was this couple that were probably in their 80s that had been living in this apartment for over 2 weeks. And they had everyone else had been able to rip out their sheetrock, throw out their furniture, do all this stuff. This couple wasn't physically able to do that. And they hadn't made it to one of the shelters. And we were there and able to connect with them, work with the Red Cross, get them into emergency housing at a hotel because the house was not able to be lived in. And just thinking through those experiences and those things, I use them every day in my job. In 2001, there was the Special Olympic World Games were held in Anchorage, Alaska. And so AmeriCorps took groups from each campus at the time and then sent a whole delegation to Alaska. And I was part of that delegation and was working with volunteers, was working with merchandising, setting up their website for merchandising stuff, like different things in Alaska. Ended up meeting Arnold Schwarzenegger, like at the opening ceremonies, like all these things, these paths that you don't expect to go on. And it was in 2001 that I ended up in Alaska, saw the work that thousands of volunteers can do. Alaska had coordinated their own volunteer group. And so they have thousands of volunteers and we're working with them and just it's just like the Olympics. They have the different venues. We've got all this stuff going on. I was able to make connections in Alaska that later in 2003 brought me back to Alaska. And that's where I still work remotely for a travel organization in Alaska doing healthcare at community health centers, the majority off the road system in rural Alaska. And it's those connections and experiences that I see in AmeriCorps, and I see it as more important today than it was in 2001. And a lot of that is just the state of and needs of our youth, of our communities. And when you're out there, I'm a rural farm girl from South Dakota. My opportunities to work in Baltimore at an inner city school, work in Alaska, experience these things probably wouldn't have happened without AmeriCorps. But when you're working in those places, you're able to serve and you're able to see gaps in both our communities and in our societal structures. But then you're also able to see what a group can do to fill those gaps. So in 2001, that lives with me continually, like every year, is on 9/11. My team and I were at the AmeriCorps headquarters, actually, we left Perry Point. And so the whole campus actually had gone into AmeriCorps headquarters on 9/11. We got into the AmeriCorps headquarters and sat down. And then that's when news came about New York. And then we realized that the Pentagon had been hit. And shortly after.
Just to be clear with everybody that's listening or watching, the AmeriCorps agency headquarters is located in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
So that was significant. Yeah.
Yes. And so we were downtown D.C. when the Pentagon was hit. So we left D.C., drove back to Perry Point, and that was like its own like surreal journey. And like just leaving DC at that time, and like you're listening to the radio at that time when you listen to the radio, and they're like, oh, the Washington Monument's gone. And you're like, what? Oh my God. And then it turned out later their webcam went down. But then you're like driving, like you couldn't get any phone calls or anything. Eventually, then it got back. I was in a group that went back to DC following 9/11 and worked for the Red Cross again. And so we ended up like training volunteers that were headed to Ground Zero. We ended up like preparing with the Red Cross briefings that the Red Cross was giving on volunteer activities that they were preparing for the Pentagon. Like when else, like you're not gonna like that loop that it put me into like a national disaster response. Then at that same time, DC there'd been like rare tornadoes in DC that the Red Cross was responding to. Then there was the anthrax disaster that started like shortly after 9/11. And in the great wisdom of bureaucracies, they opened up a shuttered hospital in DC to do the anthrax testing. And they were short on anthrax tests. And so you had thousands of people showing up in an abandoned hospital and somebody determining who could get tests or not get tests. And so it was a very, very like tense situation, complete with like news helicopters flying like over the hospital at all times to record the chaos outside of like people fighting and all this kind of stuff. So our team's job was bring food, snacks to the hospital because the hospitals closed down. There was nothing available. There was nothing. And learned a key lesson in that just make sure people aren't hangry. They're not going to fight if they're holding snacks.
Yeah. So, I mean, that I agree with you in terms of how a national service year, it opens up your minds to fill the gaps, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, where's the gap here? Okay, somebody needs food. Where's the gap here? So you had mentioned you're a farm girl from South Dakota. And is that where you're located right now?
Yes, it is.
So you're in South Dakota. So when you're thinking about your national service year, what is it now that you're doing, like into 2026 or 2025 or whatever, that kind of was that through line to reflect back, or the through line of what brings service up to the forefront, and where are you like filling those gaps in your community now that you have that lens that national service provided?
Yes. And so there are a few different areas. I think in South Dakota is, interestingly, the only state without a service commission.
Service commission.
Oh, I have recently had a couple of conversations in regards to that, in looking at how do we look at this for South Dakota. Additionally, looking at our communities here in South Dakota, understanding that power of a team to get things done and being able to form groups. And some of the soft skills I think that you learn in AmeriCorps, honestly, are, and I'm speaking in particularly NCCC because that's my experience.
Sure.
NCCC, team-based, you're cooking for your team, you're gathering together around a table. I think that ability of individuals to know, you know what, I can throw together a meal for 15 people and I can have them around the table. And it doesn't matter if the table's in a park. It doesn't matter if the table's in the homeless shelter that is, we're currently living in, or a tent in the woods that we happen to be living in. It doesn't really matter. You have that confidence to be able to pull that together and gather people and not feel the pressures of everything being perfect. And I feel like that's a underappreciated skill and thing in today's world, where I'm just very fine with gathering people together, having people over, having those conversations and connection points, whether that's in regards to my church, my kids' school, environmental project, that ability to do that. And I see that through my friends who are former AmeriCorps team members as well, is there's this confidence in that.
Yeah, and I think you're speaking to community, right? Sometimes when we think about service, we think that we have to go and do a thing for a group in a particular place. But service can just simply be having community together and holding space for community. Would you say that that's something that
I think so? And I think it's also being that person who can create the community.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have groups of friends, and we have the one friend who's the one who's actually pulling the plan together,
right,
and bringing that together. Everyone's yeah, let's do that. And I think so much about AmeriCorps is giving those soft communication and other skills to be able to be that person, to pull it together, to send the date, to say, you know what, I'm really tired of the garbage, literal trash being on the road in our community. And I know some other people are too. Let's get together and see what we can figure out about this. I think you've seen it done they've put you in positions to do that, and you have confidence to do that. And I see that throughout my life in South Dakota, and like my work in Alaska, in like the difference in finding people, determining like key concerns that are shared, making that like safe place, and going out and changing the world.
I
Doing
like that.
small things.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, like when we think about, I feel like sometimes when we talk about service or volunteerism, we're thinking about this event that we have to have, or we have to go to a shelter, or that kind of visual. But again, holding space for community to feel comfortable is service. It really, really is. I mean, you mentioned church, faith-based organizations make space for community, and that is service. That's right. Like when you go to church, it's service. Yeah. Not to get religious or doctorate or whatever, but I feel like what you're speaking to is through your NCCC year, and now in South Dakota. And when you mentioned the commissions, for folks that don't know what that is, State Service Commission is the state organization or depends on where it's placed in the state. But basically, it's a portfolio of AmeriCorps programs where they place AmeriCorps members across the state to address state issues. South Carolina is the only state in our country that doesn't have one for whatever reason. But so I think what you're speaking to, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that like your experience with NCCC has given you now the confidence to not only hold space in your own community physically in South Dakota, but also virtually in your work in Alaska. So you're making impact, like double impact. Go, Laura.
Well, I think I started with like the questions. I'm like, okay, the hardest question was, how do you define your community? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and as we kind of close down and land this plane, let's reflect. Can you reflect a little bit about, you had mentioned your kids' schools and your community and picking up trash. Is there something that you particularly engage in, to call it volunteering, call it whatever? I didn't know coaching my kids in sports was actually volunteering, but it is. Right. So is there something that you do with your family or yourself that is considered that you consider volunteering or service?
Absolutely. So one of the big things is through my kids' school. My kids go to immersion school. It's a public school in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we have hosted interns who come, that are generally like native Spanish speakers, to come to the United States as the final year of their college experience, to teach. And so we have hosted multiple interns in our home for the school year, and like held different gatherings for the interns. And it's just like such an interesting experience in the learning that we both do, the experiencing of different cultures, the seeing and being able to share our community. And I often say, like, you don't really, like, one of the best ways to see your community is like through somebody else's eyes.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh my gosh, like this is awesome. And you're like, what? Like you're like, oh, I guess that the parks are clean. I never really thought of, you know what I mean? Like things that you take for granted, or they're like, why is it this way? And you're like, that's a really good question. You know, why is it the teacher's job to direct traffic outside the school? I don't know. I just started taking it for granted. Employers have employees out there directing traffic.
Yeah. Wow, I love that example. And again, it's a non-traditional way of service, right? And it's just such a great example, and it's an immersion for you and your family, and also the students that you support. So thank you so much for sharing. And I love, and Perry Hall, that's in Baltimore, right? So when you talked about your NCCC.
Perry Point, yes.
Point.
And so I believe that campus, I don't know, campus is no longer.
Correct.
Yeah.
No. And so anyways, I want to just say thank you so much, Laura, for jumping on this 250 and Beyond series. And for folks that are out there and you're listening to the AmeriCorps Connections podcast, please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And we'll be back with another 250 and Beyond AmeriCorps alum interview. So hang in there because this is a ride. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.